Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Artisans of Steel podcast. I have a very awesome guest today, Mr. JD Smith. To me, he's a living legend, and I think to many around the world because of the high level that he sets for um, execution of pattern development and finish work and just the beautiful collaboration pieces and solo pieces that he's created in this world. They really set a really high bar for a lot of people to draw inspiration and influence from. And um and I'm really excited to talk to him today because I don't know if JD's actually done a podcast before. I know he's done some speaking in a lot of places and has done demonstrations and knife at hammer-ins and I think knife shows in the past. And I'm just really excited to have this conversation with him, to help introduce him to maybe a few folks out there who might not know who he is, as well as his contributions to the craft that so many of us use today. But before we get started, I want to just give a quick thanks to the super sponsors for the Patreon super sponsors. We got Red Dragon Forge, the Scotch Explorer, McWright Handmade, Ouzel Finch Beers, Maritime Knife Supply, Cutthroat Australia, Anchorage Brewing, T&T Forge, Rocco Knives, and Mr. Josh Weston. All of these folks you can find on Instagram. Give them all a follow. Go check out their stories. They're all great guys doing great work. House Bear Forge has just popped in. Thank you, sir. And we're going to get rocking and rolling. So, like I said in my intro, JD Smith is a maker whose work, I think when I first started knife making, it was one of the first knife maker names that I learned, and it's because of the high bar and the exemplary work that he does. And it's just, I don't know. I think it's a very fortunate thing to be able to have him in here and have him speak because, like I said early in the intro, he has contributed a lot to the craft. And what I'm really interested in helping to share is how he even got started, because he started long before he was making knives. He was doing all kinds of other very cool stuff, and I'm really excited to get that part of his story into the conversation, as well as where he's at, where he's been, and where he's going, and then maybe some Q&A at the end. So hello, JD Smith. How are you, my friend?
Hi there. Hi, Mariko.
It's great to connect with you. I first met you at the Seattle Knife Show in 2014. Was the first time I ever met you. It was a show put on by Gallery and Daniel O'Malley.
Yeah,
And you were there with some pieces that you had collaborated, especially some very some pieces that you had collaborated with. I believe it's Joseph Snyder.
that's right.
Um, and can't remember the pieces. Was it the Puma that you had there? Do you remember?
We called it the Panther.
The Panther. Sorry, the Panther.
Yeah.
That it was a real, and these pieces, not only was the steel extremely clean and beautifully etched and finished, but the pommel work and the scabbard work that Joseph does is beautiful.
Oh
It's an
man,
amazing compliment.
he's
um
amazing.
yeah, and that's another part of the conversation I want to get into later too. It's just like how you develop that relationship, because I feel like so many makers today feel like they have to do it all themselves and that's the only way to do it. But the reality is that there are a lot of really talented makers and artists out there that I think a lot of us bladesmiths could benefit from doing some cross collaborating and really working with somebody who has a really high level of skill and maybe something like the definitely skills I don't have. So to help embellish and create outstanding art pieces. Um, so that was, I first met you there. I'm trying to think. We've actually only had a few in-person interactions, and I think I saw you again at the Seattle Knife Show again the following year. But then after that, it wasn't until I was in Connecticut at the Dragon's Breath Forge Hammer-In
Oh,
that I
yeah.
saw you again. That was only what, 2018, I think, when I saw you there at that Hammer-In.
Mm.
Um, and again, I mean, there's a lot going on at all of those different events. David Singer, how's it going, bud? Um, and so it's hard to have really, at least for me, I'm like a dog chasing squirrels basically, and it's I have a hard time getting into having a deep conversation with many people at those events just because there's so much going on. So again, I'm very thankful for this opportunity, and I appreciate you coming in. And I want to,
My pleasure.
yeah. So I know you as being from Massachusetts, but is that where you're from originally? How did you, you have a history of being a fantastic salsa dancer, a jazz musician, a precious metalsmith, a bladesmith, a teacher. Where does it all start? I mean, what were you like as a kid?
I was a nerdy kid.
Okay.
That was a real nerd. I was a real science nerd kid. Always studying stuff about that. I grew up. I was born and raised in New York City,
Okay.
and from the age of I really became aware of blades as an art form when I was about 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
I remember was one summer, late summer afternoon. I was strolling around Central Park by myself. I did a lot of things alone. I was a real kind of an introverted, nerdy kid.
Okay.
I spent a lot of time in solitude. I still do. It's one of the things that kind of annoys people about me, especially girlfriends and wives and such. I spend a lot of time alone. But I was wandering around the city, and
Oh, did a phone call come in? We'll get him back in just a second. Oh, you got muted. Let's see if we can unmute you. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself real quick.
I'm unmuted.
Okay, perfect. Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. So I was wandering around Central Park, and I got down as far as the museum, Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I just
Oh, wow.
strolled in there. And I think this at the time, this is going back to what, 1959.
Okay.
So it was either free or whatever a 10-year-old kid would have in his pocket, a dime, a quarter, or whatever the admission was.
Okay.
And I started strolling around to the arms and armory section, and I looked and was very fascinated by what I saw, the European and the Islamic and the Indian work and things like
Sure.
that. And some of the Japanese stuff was there as well. And I remember seeing a jade handled like shamshir, and it was encrusted with diamonds and emeralds.
Mm-hmm.
Then I looked at the blade, and I remember seeing all these squiggly lines all over it. And I'm like,
Sure.
what the hell is that? Then I kind of put it out of my mind, and I didn't really think about it again until maybe I remember 1971 or two, when I was working as a musician, and I had gone up to a friend's house who was in the band, and he had on his coffee table in his house an Indonesian kris. And I remember taking it out and looking at it and go, oh shit, there are those wavy lines again.
Yeah.
What is this? And the question was just an open question in my mind until 1979 or so, when I picked up a copy of Soldier of Fortune magazine, and they had an article about Bill Bagwell and his Damascus fighters.
Oh, interesting.
And I finally had a name for what it was.
Okay.
Damascus steel, pattern welded steel. I had never even really heard those words before.
Sure.
And as I looked at it in utter fascination that this was a thing, I kind of decided then and there that I'm going to know more about this and that I'm eventually going to do it.
Wow. Okay. So that's I'm sorry, again, you're about in your 20s at this point?
And I had just turned 30.
Just turned 30. Okay. Wow.
And, eventually, I was also in college,
Okay.
Berkeley College of Music.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So at that point in time, I had been taking some courses in musical instrument repair, and I was getting a little bit more familiar with working metal. We are taking out dents, fixing musical instruments, learning to solder, blah blah blah, all
Sure.
those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I kind of put that on the back burner for a while after I had graduated, and I was working around as a musician in the Boston area, doing
Hmm.
pretty much everything. And I started dating the woman who would eventually become my wife. We would eventually marry, and she was a silversmith. She was
Oh, okay.
Russian, and she suggested that as a musician, I was in a period of what I would call underemployment. And
Okay.
she decided that, that she would let me know about something, which was that there was a position for a silversmith trainee open in the shop that she was working in.
Okay.
And I, took that position, and she taught me silversmithing from the ground up.
Wow.
And eventually, that company we worked for decided that the repair and restoration department really wasn't something that they wanted to deal with anymore. But we decided that we would buy that business from them. So we
Sure.
bought their client list, their tools, and everything. I think we put together around $6,000,
Wow.
and bought the studio basically. And
Right.
we took their client list and we began to expand it ourselves, and to include customers like the Museum of Fine Arts,
Oh,
Shreve,
wow.
Crump and Lowe, Firestone and Parsons. And we were doing basically antique restoration and repair of silver
Hmm.
stuff,
Right.
candelabras, liturgical stuff, silverware, vessels, urns, anything. And we often had to repair, take out dents, take off engraving, re-engrave it,
Wow.
fabricate and repair broken parts, things like that. So I was getting a lot of experience working metal at this time, because she would give me directed projects to do and things like
Sure.
assignments also, actually, because she was really interested in developing, my skills and helping me.
Hmm.
But there came a point around 1982 where, working for the company, they told us that the blacksmith at the Saugus Ironworks National Historical Site had made some specialized silversmithing tools for us, and that we were to go up to the smithy where he was working and pick them up. So, we all got in the car that day and went up there to Saugus, Mass. It was maybe 15 minutes outside of Boston.
Okay.
And so we went on the site. It was the site of the first ironworks in the New World, basically.
Oh, wow.
And they had reconstructed the site and resurrected it from an archaeological dig. They resurrected everything and brought it back.
Wow.
And the
Okay.
blacksmith on site was basically restoring all the ironwork. His name was Steve Nichols.
Okay.
He now is the blacksmith on the USS Constitution. But in any case, when we got there, we were told to go collect our order down at the smithy. So we went down there, and I walked into the smithy, and it was just like, I smelled the coal and iron, and I was just like, oh, okay, here we go.
Sure.
This is my next move. This is it for me. So I bugged the guy for a good 6 months about taking me on as an apprentice, and it was like, yeah, no time, blah blah blah. And he finally relented and put me in a special government program for teaching traditional arts and blah blah blah.
Okay.
And so I stayed with him for the next 3 years. I worked with him a couple of days a week, and he knew I was interested in bladesmithing, and he was a pretty good bladesmith himself.
Okay.
He did, all the replica cutlasses and things for the Constitution, and he was a really good tool maker himself. He could make most hand tools, chisels, knives,
Sure.
pliers, tongs, hammers. He was real good at those things. And he taught me a lot about, fabricating tools, heat treating. I learned all that stuff first from him. I
Wow.
did my first pattern welded steel there from old files and wrought iron,
Oh my
all
God.
made on the anvil with him striking, things like
Right.
that. So I got a really good, solid, basic blacksmithing education out of it, which has stood me in really good stead over the years. A lot of bladesmiths don't really get that kind of solid blacksmithing background.
Definitely not. I wish I had that, honestly, myself. We often, I often get people reaching out asking, I want to start making knives. I want to start forging blades. Where should I start? And I always tell them to take a blacksmithing course
Yeah,
because understanding how the material moves
that's it.
first is so important.
It's absolutely essential. I don't think that it's irreplaceable in my opinion.
Yeah.
From there you can do many other things besides bladesmithing,
Right.
decorative work, structural work, engineering stuff. You can do so many things. But in any case, I got my start there, and eventually I moved out on my own, and I just happened to hook up with the guys from Ashokan in 1985. I remember my wife was pregnant with our first daughter, and so I remember taking an outing out to the Higgins Armory. And
Okay.
there was Jimmy Fikes, Joe Kalsa, Bud Hubbard, Kevin Moreau, Tim Zawada. They were all there.
Okay.
And it was the first time I had discovered that there's a whole group of kindred spirits
Right.
who just as insanely crazy about this stuff as I was,
Right.
And so I got a chance to meet them. I got a chance to show my work, see their work, and just became suddenly aware of a far greater world than I had,
Sure.
suspected existed where this bladesmithing thing was concerned. So Joe, I've discovered that Joe Kalsa was actually lived fairly close to me. And I approached him about being an apprentice in his shop. And he says, no, okay, let's do that. We'll check it out and see how it goes.
Yeah.
And I ended up being with him for 2 years. He taught me all the nuts and bolts about knife making, how to put one together, how to flat grind, how to hollow grind, how to slot guards, drill holes. He gave
Wow.
me all the real solid nuts and bolts stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, also around this time, I had gotten acquainted with Jimmy Fikes, who lived in Orange, Mass at the time. He lived maybe almost 2 hours away. And on Saturdays, I'd go out there and hang out with him. And he'd teach me about blade forging and, all the things he was good at.
Right.
And I especially was attracted to his kind of really utilitarian mindset about performance and heat treating and things like that.
Okay.
Whereas Jote was a little more concentrated on the aesthetics, because he was like the king of the art dagger at the time. There weren't that many guys doing that, but he was one of the better ones at it.
Yeah.
In any case, I was absorbing from different people like him and Jote and Jimmy Fikes and Don Fogg. I was just looking at his work, and just trying to just improve my skills along the way. I eventually opened up my own shop in Boston, South Boston. I slowly put it together. I had been doing a lot of stock removal stuff and some forging stuff, but I began to set up a business by just funneling most of what I sold in terms of the money back into my own business.
Sure.
Every time I sold something, I pay these bills, that bills, and I put it towards the next piece of equipment.
Right.
In about 3 years' time, I was actually able to amass enough, physical equipment and space and things like that to actually open my own shop in South Boston. And I did that in 1990. I basically started with that.
Okay. And you're
And
at that point, I'm just trying to keep track of your timeline. So you're in your late 30s now at that point.
yeah. 1990, I would have been, hell,
Oh, okay.
41.
Okay. You're very
Yeah.
late 30s then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, it's interesting. It's so cool hearing you talk because nowadays I feel like people search knife making or knife makers or custom knives and they very easily find all kinds of information. There's several magazines, there's so many resources, and it sounds like when you were first getting started, there was very little of that to none of that.
Mm.
And I can't even imagine what it was like feeling like you were kind of like exploring this craft kind of in a vacuum with nobody else.
Oh
And
yeah,
then
you have
all
to
of a
be
sudden you discovered this vein of gold where all these other makers are playing and you're just like, "Oh, there are others."
right. It's like almost like finding an extraterrestrial. Like we're not alone in the
Yeah.
universe.
That's amazing. And Jimmy Fikes, that name I've heard a lot. I've heard Steve Schwarzer talk about Jimmy Fikes. I've heard Don Fogg talk about Jimmy Fikes. I'm hearing you talk about Jimmy Fikes. A lot of I hope you don't take offense, but the old school makers, like the OGs, I hear them talk about Jimmy Fikes, and I don't know anything about Jimmy Fikes, really, other than these people refer to him often as a very talented maker and a mentor and a friend. And I was wondering if you
He
could
was all
expand a
those.
little
He
bit
was,
more
he
about,
was all those things to me.
yeah.
He was all those. Although he was just a few years older, not
Okay.
there's no great gap in our ages,
Right.
but he had a tremendous helping spirit. Very friendly, very brotherly fella, and he generous, really, really generous individual. I mean, with his time, with
Right.
his knowledge, extremely generous. And he was a pioneer in what we would call performance smithing.
Oh,
He
interesting.
was pushing the envelope for edge retention, edge geometry and engineering, and
Okay.
he was really pushing that envelope hard. He was the first that I had ever seen or known who was doing serious destructive testing to blades to see when and how they failed.
Right. Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. I
Yeah,
mean, I think for anybody who thinks they want to get serious, they definitely have to destroy blades. And
you
and
got
they have to push past what they think is the boundary to see how far they can actually, like, even just chef's knives. So many people ask me like, how thin is thin? And I'm like, you just got to keep pushing it until you fall off that cliff and then back it up a little bit.
then
And
back it up a little.
yeah. And then at that point, after you back it up a little bit, then you chop into something and see what it can take. And obviously go harder than you maybe realistically would in a kitchen, cutting up vegetables and boneless meats and stuff. But I think that's really important for people to do. And I don't think enough people actually do that. And I've often myself, if I have a knife that I've made a mistake on or a pattern didn't turn out the way I wanted, or I'm just frustrated with something, I'll actually just take that knife and I'll start destruction testing it. One, it's therapeutic in a way a little bit, but it also tells me what's actually going on with my work, especially my pattern welded stuff. And what does that look like when you break through a cross section of that? are the layers still defined, or does it look like a homogeneous solid single piece of steel, which is really important to see. I think for a lot of people don't even actually see that in their steel because they've never taken one of their precious Damascus blades and broken it right in half. And so,
Well, yeah, that's
yeah,
one of the first things I think I learned from Jimmy was like, stop treating this material like it's precious.
sure.
Just, work with it, and working with it may sometimes mean you gotta break it, you gotta
Yeah.
destroy it, but just work with it. So that's one of the main things I got from Jimmy was working with the steel,
Mhm.
testing and driving it to its limits. And I became associated with the ABS and the Knife Makers Guild also around this time,
Okay.
joining both organizations. Okay.
Yeah.
And I eventually became a voting member in the guild. And I eventually, you know, through the ABS, went through their whole advancement system
Sure.
to eventually in 1998 getting my MS. That's a while ago now. Hell, that's like 24 years ago. I can't believe it's
Right.
almost 25 years.
Was Bill Burke also in that MS class? I feel like he got his in
Not,
98.
not. He is a little later than me.
Oh, okay. All right.
He was, I don't know, 2000s perhaps. I
Okay.
don't know. I
Sure,
don't
sure.
know. But I had known him for some time because I knew him from the Oregon knife makers club and scene.
Right. The
And a lot of
OKCA
other who
show.
was coming up. There was like Wade Coulter,
Sure.
and Rick, Dun-
Dunkerley.
Dunkerley.
Yeah.
Rick Dunkerley. We would all go to the Oregon show and hang out and just have a great time. And we were all coming up right around that same time.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can see I used to be part of the OKCA, which is the organization out there in Eugene, and they have an archive of all of their past newsletters, and you can
Mhm.
see old newsletters where you and so many recognizable faces are standing around
Mhm.
because you're doing the cutting competitions or you're doing
Mhm.
demonstrations and stuff, and I see that and I'm like, man, it would have been wild to because it's not often these days that you guys get together in groups like that anymore.
Oh man, we had such a good time. That
Yeah,
was like probably my favorite show to do. I mean,
sure.
for many years, I just loved that show.
Yeah.
Yeah, they treated me so well there. I mean, I really did. I remember the competitions. I used to win a lot of awards there. I think I've won maybe 28 awards over the years
Right.
out of there for various things.
Yeah.
I had a really good customer base there, so it was always a great show to
That's
go to.
great.
Really enjoyed it. But over the years, I began to get a lot of attention from the knife magazines, Jim Wire and Blade magazine, and Bud Lang. And whatever happened to him? Knives. He had a magazine called Knives and some other things.
Okay.
And and I was beginning to get published quite a bit, and my customer base was growing, and I was basically I had established my style
Yeah.
pretty much as it's become to be known, and how it's developed. Was really started right around that time, early 90s,
Okay.
through the early through the 90s. The 90s were my time. At some point, I did the New York show, and Wayne Goddard was there. This is 1992. Yeah, Wayne Goddard came, and he talked to me. He looked at my work, and he goes back to Oregon and does a report on the New York show, and he said something to the effect of, "I always enjoy New York's one of my favorite shows. I always enjoy talking to various makers. This time, I talked to and looked at the work of J.D. Smith, and he said something to the effect of, he's my pick for superstar bladesmith of the 90s." And I was like, what?
Right. Because Wayne Goddard was a living legend at the time for you, right?
Yeah. And I was
Yeah.
just like, what? And so the next thing I know, I had table there and had a ticket to be at the next Oregon show.
Yeah.
And I began to do very well there. And Wayne, from that point on, he pretty much did everything he possibly could to push my name, push my work. If there was any opportunity to say anything positive about me or my work, he would take it.
Wow.
And so I'm incredibly indebted to him for everything he did for me. I don't think I'd be anything of the kind of accomplishment or presence that I had in this industry had it not been for his falling under his notice.
Wow.
I think that was a real game changer for me.
Sure. And I imagine a good relationship blossomed from that.
Yes.
Yeah.
We became very, very close friends at that point. In fact, before he passed away in, I forget what it was, 2014 or 15, I'm not sure, maybe even 16.
I think it might have been 16.
He gave me he passed his master stamp to me.
Oh, wow.
So his master stamp is what I signed my work with.
Yeah, wow. That's incredible. That's incredible. It's Sorry, go ahead.
No, he gave me his master stamp, and I'm like, wow. Yeah, I feel so honored by that. That's
I feel like that would be a pretty powerful honor, and to be able to still be using that stamping. It's like a continuance of his legacy through you.
I consider it to be that. I definitely consider it that. One of the most important things that I got from Wayne is to continue when you possibly can. If you see somebody who you judge that has talent that can be developed and helped along and pushed, do it.
Sure.
Do it. So there's a number of makers that I've tried over the years to develop and help become as good as they can possibly be. Andrew Mears,
right?
Kevin Klein, Zach Jonas. There's a bunch more, a whole bunch.
Tom Ward, and
Tom Ward.
All of them are. So you when do you become a professor at Mass Art?
Well, then there's that whole that whole chapter. I remember it was 1991. I had it was summer, beginning of the summer. I remember it was a real hot day, and I was walking in the neighborhood of Massachusetts College of Art, and for whatever reason, I don't really recall, I had some Damascus blades on me. So I just said, you know what? I'm just gonna walk in here.
Yeah.
I walked into school. I said, where's the metals department? And somebody directed me, and I saw the department head, Joe Wood, and I said, knock. Yeah, what do you want? Kind of a deal. I said, well, and I just unfolded the blade. Says, may I show you something? And he goes, yeah, okay. Well, if you're not offering instruction in this, you can't really say you're offering the best and most timely kinds of instruction here. And he looked at them and he goes, you're right.
Wow. That is a ballsy thing to do, to just step up and say that to somebody.
just went in cold.
Yeah.
And he said, he goes, you're right. Do you want to do a guest artist spot?
Wow.
So he arranges a guest artist demo for me, and I made some pattern welded steel. A lot of people became interested, and maybe a year later, he invited me again, and I got invited again, yet a third time, at which point, one of the other sculpture professors just said to me, his name was George Greenemeyer, says, would you like a job here?
Right. You keep teaching here. Why don't you just get a job? That's great.
So I got a job, and they let me teach a bladesmithing course. They let me structure it the way I wanted to.
Right.
They helped me equip the shop to really get it going properly. And as they say, the rest is history. I mean,
Wow.
and what was it? What year was it? I believe it was 2004 or five. Or Andrew Mears was trying to smack some pallet strapping together the pattern welded, and I was like, I said, man, you know what? Meet me here like Thursday at 4 o'clock during open shop time, and I'll get you started right.
I see. So he came in at some like an open shop time, or was he in one of the
Yeah, he was there
classes?
just open shop time. No
Okay. Yeah.
script.
Yeah.
So come on down at this hour, and I'll get you started with pattern welding. So, I got him started. We had a long session that day, and I got him started. And within a few weeks, he was on it,
Yeah.
and he was doing good. That became his sole focus at the school, was bladesmithing. And I think he was the first one to graduate for Bachelor's of Fine Arts Sculpture, concentration bladesmithing.
Wow.
So he was the first one to get an actual degree in bladesmithing from the school.
I love it.
And many others followed.
Yeah. And
Not many.
he went on to teach at Penland and over in
That's right.
Carbondale, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So you inspired him, I guess, to teach as well. It must have been a powerful experience for him to want to carry that torch in that way.
Well, there are many people who studied under me who have viable businesses that they're earning, and they're creating, and they're influencing, and they're producing great works of utility and art. So
Right.
I'm really proud of that aspect of my history with students.
Sure. And I'm just trying to think. It's around this time that you're developing new techniques for blade forging that where you're inventing like the fish mouth or bird mouth
Yeah.
technique. Can you talk a bit about this technique and what was happening before and what informed your innovation in this
Okay.
technique?
Uh-huh. Well, I had been watching guys do the Viking thing where they would wrap one type of pattern welded material in like a U shape around another piece, and to around the core section to basically get the edge material to wrap completely around the blades, so that point and edges would be one type of material and the core would be another type.
Yeah.
And the way I had seen guys like Scott Langton and others do it, where they would form a U-shaped weld around it and like jump weld it onto the core.
Okay.
And I remember trying to do it a couple of times and being quite unsuccessful, because if you don't really nail it just right, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You'll stretch apart, and then you'll have to take a tuck out of it and kind of reform it, and it often goes south for me. I don't know about anybody else.
I've never tried it, but it's that's the exact same concern I would have.
I was never able to do it with any consistent success. And I remember I was doing like a twist edge on just an ordinary single edge knife.
Yeah.
And I remember cutting it at an angle so that when I straightened out the knife, the edge that I had welded on would just wrap around,
Oh, it would follow the curve.
around, and just follow the curve. Right. And I looked at that and I said, wait a second. This can be done from two sides, just by having that material on the edge on a square bar, then cutting a V and then bringing them together.
Right.
and
Wow.
will wrap around perfectly and without the awkward mess that you end up doing it the other way. So the first time I tried it was completely successful. It was actually on a folder blade.
Right. I think I have actually an example of that somewhere. I don't know. Oh, here we go. Screen share. Let's see if I can get in here. Can you see my screen right now?
I'm looking right at it.
Okay. Let's see. This is my first time trying to do a screen share on on uh on this thing. I don't think it's gonna work actually. Unfortunately, I might have to practice that for next time. I have seen that folder though, and I've seen several examples that you've done in the past, and they're phenomenal, and especially when you're using them with the twist pattern, the way the twists, or let's see, I've seen you do the twist pattern as the core, and then it's has like a random pattern or a straight layer pattern around the
I
outer
do it a
edge.
number of different
Yeah,
ways.
and but especially the way it makes those twists come together into kind of an arc in like a Gothic cathedral. It's it's beautiful. It's a beautiful
Oh,
thing.
thank you.
Yeah. And and you start doing that. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's just a technique that I developed that it seems to be the kind of the standard way to do it now. I've
Yeah.
seen makers from all over the bladesmiths all over the world now do it that way
Yeah.
rather than the old, more traditional way.
I mean,
Then
honestly, it makes the most sense. What's great about that technique, it is the smartest way, I think, to do it. And the the highest chance of success is going to happen through that for sure.
it's like pretty close to 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just you can't go wrong. I mean, you got to try really hard to f it up,
Right.
because it just does it, all by itself practically. You
Yeah.
set it up properly, it goes.
Yeah. And is that something, obviously you didn't, it's not something you kept to yourself. Did you start sharing it at hammer-ins or just talking with other
Oh gosh,
makers or
so long ago I don't even remember, but
okay.
I mean,
I mean, it seems like a technique that people would love to see demonstrated at a hammer-in, even today.
no, I've done it. I've done it many
Yeah.
times in parents. But the one of the other things I began doing also is abandoning the use of flux in pattern welding,
Sure.
what I call bareback welding. You just,
Bareback.
no,
And
no
how,
flux.
yeah, how did you decide, or what inspired you to decide to stop using flux or start experimenting with no flux?
Well, there were a bunch of guys were welding with diesel oil and oil
Okay.
like that, and I said, look, okay, where's the science here? What's happening? Why does this work?
Yeah.
Okay, and I began kind of delving into that a little bit and discovering that after I tried it a few times, you know what? I don't know what that oil is about, but you don't need it.
Oh, I see. So you just skipped the oil and you just started playing with it and you
Yeah.
started doing the
Well,
bareback.
what I started thinking about was like, what is the chemistry behind forge welding? What is actually happening
Sure.
down at the molecular level? What's going on with this?
Okay. Let's hear it.
So the more I read about it, the more I understood it as it's basically what they call covalent bonding. And I started to think, okay, so what's going on? What is the chemistry? What's the chemistry of combustion? You got to have oxygen, you got to have heat, and you got to have fuel. That's combustion.
Yeah.
Things burn with that triangle. Take one out, you don't have it. Any one of those three things, it's gone. Okay. So what I discovered was if you starve the forge of oxygen, it's gotta get it from somewhere. So what happens when you starve your forge, when you make it really lean, and you get the flames coming out because it's seeking oxygen.
So oxygen lean is when you say lean, you mean oxygen lean?
Oxygen poor.
Yeah. Okay.
Not fuel lean.
Okay.
Oxygen poor. And thank you for that. And basically, the fire has to get it from somewhere. You just got to get the oxygen, so it gets it from the scale.
Right.
It sucks it right out of the scale. And when you take the oxygen, what are you left with? Pure iron.
Right. Okay. Right. Because it's iron oxide.
Right.
The fuel consumes the oxygen, leaving
And
behind the iron.
you're just left with iron. And when you have the metal that hot with that much energy in it, when the energy state of the metal is that high,
Right.
and you bring the surfaces close enough, what happens is, and this is electrical in nature,
Okay.
the outer electron shells of the atoms basically will switch positions with their neighbors, and they will bond, and they will form. They become a solid piece at that point.
Yeah.
So I threw this out there at some point, and guys like Kevin Cashin started fooling with it, and he's the real science guy with this. He'll do it, then he'll polish it, and he'll look at it under an electron microscope and go like, okay, here's what's happening. And what he discovered was the bonds are much stronger because the flux basically is a barrier. It leaves stuff. It doesn't cleanly evacuate. There's always a residual, there's always a residue. And that residue basically forms inclusions, and those inclusions keep the steel from fully bonding.
Right.
And it weakens it. If you have any kind of a flaw or any kind of a structural misalignment or flaw, it's going to be where some flux got left.
Sure.
So he did a lot of micrographs of welds done with flux, done without flux. And he showed that without flux, they're much cleaner and more complete. The welding is complete.
Right.
And I believe on one bladesmithing page on Facebook, I remember it was like Knifemaker's white page or something like that.
Whiteboard. Yeah.
A whiteboard. I did a flux-free weld, and I just tapped it a few times, and then I turned it on edge and proceeded to really like wail on it and draw it out.
Oh wow!
After only hitting it just to set it, I said, "You cannot do this with a fluxed weld; it will come apart because those bonds will not be strong enough to withstand that kind of deformation." At a right angle, they won't be able to do it. But if you do it without flux, all you need to do is just kind of smack it a few times. Then you just go straight to hammering it out on the bias, or perpendicular to the original direction.
Right.
So it makes the bonds are much stronger, much more durable, and more of them form more quickly. I basically have identified that as being a much superior way of producing pattern material than using flux. You don't need it. You just need to control your atmosphere.
Yeah. In regards to, so what kind of surface prep are you doing on the material before you attempt these fluxless welding bonds, as well as what kind of time are you allowing the material to soak to kind of what we've talked about before, or I've talked about with other makers, is the idea of aging a welded a bond or a weld. So setting the weld and then aging it, and allowing it to soak at kind of a lower temperature to allow those atoms to create a strong, basically give them more time to exchange and create a stronger bond. What are your thoughts on those things?
Well, here's my thoughts on that. Your weakest weld is going to be your last one
Okay.
because it hasn't had that time to cure and age that we're talking
Sure.
about. All the
I see.
potential bonds have not formed.
Right.
Each time you get a few more bonds each time you actually go to welding temperature and strike it, so that the oldest welds are your strongest ones, and the newest ones are your weakest welds.
Interesting. So you're kind of looking at it through the entire process of making the pattern.
That's right.
So
That's why
each welding, like cut and restack, is another opportunity to continue to allow those
that's right.
forge welding
That's
bonds
right.
to.
That's right.
Interesting.
That's why I advocate above all not forging the final number of layers that you want to work with too close to finished dimensions, because you need to give them time to actually cure and age, as you call it.
Yeah.
So I'll never, if I want to arrive at like 3/8 of an inch thickness,
Sure.
before I don't do my final welds at
At
like
that
close
dimension.
to
Yeah.
at that close to that dimension. I do my final welds far bigger,
Sure.
so that as I draw it out,
It's
the
getting that time.
I continue to get more covalent bonding, so
Right.
the weld is stronger.
Yeah, I've heard people talk about getting at least a 50% reduction. So if like you're saying you want to end up with 3/8, then at least starting with material that's 5/8, or sorry, 3/4 of an inch thick. Um so that as you're reducing that material down, it's getting that time at those high temperatures to encourage those bonds with each other. So for you, that kind of reduction is more about time at temperature to allow those bonds to be stronger versus I I I never actually really understood why some people were like, I need 20% reduction or 30% or 50% reduction. I never heard it in relationship to how much time the material is getting. It was just getting at temperature and allowing those weld bonds to occur or to strengthen. It just seemed like you just need this much reduction so that it doesn't come back apart. But I don't know why I've never heard it in relationship with encouraging those weld bonds to strengthen. But it's very cool to hear you say that.
Mm. Well, that's one of the benefits of having a conversation like this, because it gives me
Right.
time to even think about why I do what I do.
Sure.
Because usually I just do it.
Yeah.
But when you think about, well, why do I do that? You start to realize that there are actually reasons for it.
Yeah.
And there's best practices and less best.
Less best. I want to talk about your relationship. Oh, sorry. So you were talking about teaching. And so how are you balancing teaching as well as your custom knife making and still going to shows and getting awards and all that good stuff? Like you just I mean, I guess the shows aren't super frequent or super long. So you just made it happen.
Well,
Or and also finding the time to make blades for those shows.
let's well, I'm getting up there, Marco. I'm in my almost my mid 70s now, so like I'm kind
Wow.
of semi-retired.
Sure.
So I'm not really doing it as nearly as much as I used to,
Sure.
and so I've cut back quite a bit.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I meant when you were still teaching and you're going to shows more, how did you balance finding the time? Because I can't imagine. I mean, I guess I could imagine at times you would have time to work on your own work during a class, but often I would imagine you were spending more time focused on what the students were working on or what kind of help they needed. But just finding that balance to find that time to get work together for a show, where you could
Well,
submit for
just
jury.
sure. I mean, when I'm at work, I was at work helping students. I was
Yeah.
in my capacity as an instructor, But for many years, I had my actual workshop in my house.
Okay.
I had like a 600 square foot space in the basement of my house where, I had all my tooling and things down there.
Yeah.
And I just spent a lot of time down there.
Yeah.
You know? Spent a lot of time down there. I
Right.
remember
So,
Kevin Klein, he actually lived around the corner
oh, really?
as well as being one of my students. So,
Yeah.
the two of us would spend an awful lot of time in that shop.
Sure.
I mean, yeah, he had a key to my place, so like, I come find, I walk in, I find him like crashed out on my couch because he had been there
Because
all
he was
night
working
or
until
something.
3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and so there was just a lot of work being done.
Yeah.
We put a lot of time into it.
Yeah. I want to step back a little bit and talk about some of the other things that you did outside of your knife making, particularly your musical background,
Yeah, yeah.
and what that looked like at the time. Obviously, you weren't doing it at the same time as you were doing your knife making,
I
but
was for a while.
or you were, okay. And then also your dance, your salsa dancing, and then also how you feel, if you feel like there's a relationship between those practices and how it influenced or inspired some of your knife making.
Definitely. I think Kevin Klein wrote an article about that recently
Oh,
in
did he?
Blade Magazine. Yeah, he did.
Oh, I
where
didn't know
he,
that.
he where he juxtaposition, my
Sure.
musical career and dancing and whatnot. He
Yeah.
he yeah, he did this past summer. Wrote a two-part article about that very thing in
Okay.
Blade. But so if anybody wants to reference that, they can, I'm sure,
Yeah,
still
go
get
go.
copies of that or go online for it.
Sure.
Matter of fact, I know those articles are online. I had actually seen them.
Okay.
But I started out my career as an illustrator in New York City. I went to art school and then got a bachelor's in art from City University. And I had been doing a lot of comic book work and illustration and things like that
Hmm.
back in the late 60s, mid 60s to late 60s. Then I had some military service, and
Okay.
when I got out, I went back to the art. But I also had a career as a musician that I developed right along with the art.
Sure.
And I was a professional trombone player for, you know, over 30 years.
Oh, wow.
And I'm back to it again, incidentally.
That's
I'm
great.
practicing every day now, and I'm pulling it back together. I'm almost where I was when I stopped.
Wow.
Getting
That's
it back
impressive.
in, coming back after 22 year
I was
22
gonna
year
say it's been a
layoff.
gap, right?
22 years,
Wow. That's awesome.
but I'm getting it back. I'm getting it back, and it's just the whole ideas about how compositions are developed, how improvisation is done, um, all that kind of permeates my 3D work, my metal work, and I don't really see one as being different from the other. They're
Hmm.
just different aspects of the same thing.
Of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I mean, you must believe that it's important for somebody who's doing this craft, especially from a creative pursuit as like angle, that they have other creative pursuits that help encourage or give them, I don't know. I find often that I'll be out doing something else that's fun or creative or hanging out with my kid, and then it kind of gives me a break from thinking too hard or too focused in one direction, especially around my knife work or pattern development. And then it clicks somewhere else once my brain has had a chance to like unlock from that individual kind of direction,
Oh,
and it opens up somewhere else, and
absolutely,
bringing it back to it.
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely. Once in a while, somebody will say, "Oh, I got a block. I can't really get anything happening here." Blah 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 blah. I says, "Step away from knives.
sure.
Go
Go
look
do
at
something
some
else.
architecture. Go to the museum. Look at some bronze stuff from China, one of their dynasties, and
Sure.
maybe some jade carvings. Look at some other kinds of art, you know, and then come back to knife making. You know, absorb artistic influences from other places.
Sure.
Don't be so focused on knives. Just move around, you know, move around the world of art, move
Yeah.
around the world of decorative art, the world of fine art. See what else is there, see what you can incorporate, see what you can, you know, take from it and make your own. And but you know, get out of that bag for a second and just
Right.
kind of move around, you know.
Yeah. Having or other kind of creative pursuits or creative outlets, I think it sounds like to me has really helped you round out your knife making and create space for you to, when you do need to check out of knife making, to have another creative, because it, instead of being again so like locked up in one direction, it's good to have multiple to go, to still have that creative input and output that could then turn around and open things back up for you again, in that,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to the knife making.
You
um
got to have that
yeah,
wellspring that you can always return to renew yourself, to renew your direction, to renew your approach, and just realign when necessary to kind of just keep things fresh,
yeah.
you know.
When did you start salsa dancing? And are you still salsa dancing?
I was out this past weekend.
That's great. That's amazing.
I went to Boston to take care of some other things, and you
Yeah,
know, went out Friday and Saturday night.
that's great.
When did I start? I started in 1999.
Okay.
That was the last year I actually did any professional trombone work. And
Okay.
I began to like feel a space had been closed of my music, and I needed to get music back in my life. So I said to
Sure.
myself, you know what? You know, because I used to be a musician that played in salsa bands quite a bit.
Okay.
And I always admired the dancers and how they, you know, moved and worked with the music. I said, you
Yeah.
know what? Why don't you try dancing? That's something you haven't actually tried yet. So I began taking lessons at the Y and whatnot, and
Yeah.
they hit a wall at some point because they
Sure.
weren't really in depth enough. So I
Right.
started going to the clubs in the Boston area that featured salsa. It was becoming quite popular. And they always had people who gave little lessons before the night actually got rolling, and I started taking those.
Yeah.
Then I started taking actually classes at the dance complex and things like that. But I found out that was not really my learning style, and
Sure.
so I basically took one of the teachers at one of these classes, and I asked her, "How about giving me private lessons?" And so she, yeah, okay. So I found out that I do better if I get somebody who's just dedicated to me for 2 hours.
I got you.
That they don't have anybody else to pay attention to. I pay them to like, here, work with me.
Yeah.
you know, and I did that for a little over a year, and that then I really started to make some progress. Then I would
Oh
go out
wow.
to the clubs and I would try it all out, and I'd dance there and I'd get better. But it's all about practice, you know how it goes,
Yeah.
becoming more familiar with it. But I will tell you this about the salsa dancing. Um, it's a very difficult thing to do if you don't have a visceral connection to the music.
Sure.
because it's about the music pretty much and
Yeah.
nothing else.
Yeah.
You got to be connected to the music. You got to find a way to put it in your body, so
Absolutely.
that your connection to that music. That I always tell people that when you dance salsa, it's mostly about improvisation. There's a core of techniques and movements that are like a language.
Hmm.
It's basically about becoming so familiar with that language, music and movement, that they become one.
Right.
They really do become one. And that you have to evolve as a dancer from dancing to the music to letting the music dance you.
I love it. Well, and I can
Completely
imagine,
different proposition.
yeah, being a musician with the depth of experience you had at the time when you first started dancing, you could almost predict where the music was going to go, even if it was a song you'd never heard
Of
before.
course. Of
And
course.
so having that insight, helping to guide the dance moves that you would use, I bet made you a really great dance partner for
Yeah,
a
yeah.
lot of women out
Well,
there.
I've been told I'm quite interesting in that way because because I do have a very, very strong connection to the music.
Yeah,
You know, I'm one of these people that when I listen to music, it's never a passive activity for me.
sure.
When
Okay.
I'm listening to music, that's what I'm doing.
Mm,
There's no side things going on. I'm listening. That's my activity,
right.
listening to the music. Right. And because I'm a trained musician, when I hear the music, I can see it also. I can
Sure.
just watch it go by.
Yeah,
No, seriously,
I believe it.
I can see like a musical stave, and I can see the notes appearing on it, and I can also I got this other kind of thing going too that I think that's really helped me as a dancer. When I listen to music, I don't know what they call this kinesthesia or whatnot, but it appears as colors to me and
Oh,
shapes.
wow. Yeah.
And I just make my body conform to the shapes
Wow.
that I see,
That's
and
cool.
it's really, really difficult to explain,
Yeah. No, I
but it's
feel you.
not just hearing the music. It's I'm processing it with several other different senses
Yeah, it's
as well.
exactly. That's what I was just gonna say. Yeah, it's coming in through many different sensors, not just your
That's
ears. You're
that's
seeing it, you're feeling it as
yeah,
well.
and also this is something else that I thought a lot about the relationship between music and dance. With music, playing an instrument is different from dancing, but it's really similar to dancing. When you play a musical instrument, it's movement in, you're manipulating an instrument and it's music out.
Mhm.
Dance, it's an inverse relationship to that. It's music in, movement out.
Right. Huh.
So they're like a yin
Kinda blew
and
my mind
yang
there for a second.
symbol.
Yeah.
They lay upon each
Right.
other, but in an inverse relationship.
Yeah.
One is movement in, music out. The other is music in, movement out. The thing with music is it exists only in the fourth dimension. It's an art of the fourth dimension in its entirety. It's about duration,
Mm,
how long that note is, how long is the rest between the notes,
right.
how many vibrations per second produce a pitch,
Right.
what is the interval of one pitch to another. It's your perception of music is basically based on time. The notes you hear now compared to the note you just heard and the one you expect to hear next.
Sure.
It's all about time. It's in the fourth dimension. However, dancing, on the other hand, is the fourth dimension plus the physical three. So it's a more complete musical experience for me because
Yeah.
I experience it on all four dimensions rather than just the dimension of time. music. I've experienced it as the physical 3 dimensions:
Sure.
height, width, depth.
Yeah.
You know,
Your
plus,
relation.
plus
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
uh, I lost that thought, but go ahead.
Shit.
Sorry.
Sorry. I was just gonna ask. Your relationship with music is so intense. That do you ever find it too distracting? Like if you're driving or you're out at dinner and music's on. Um, to because you were saying earlier that when you're listening to, well, and I guess if your focus is to listen to music, then I could see how that could be distracting. If something else like I'm having a hard time. I don't know. Do you ever have has music ever become a distraction, too distracting to you because it's something that is just has caught your attention so much that it pulls you out of something else that you might be doing, whether it's having a conversation or
Yeah,
driving
like
or anything?
only all the time. Okay,
Only
that's
all the time. Okay. Do you have to not listen to music then when you're driving or something like that? Do you listen to talk radio or silence or audiobooks?
honestly a lot of the time when I'm listening to music. I'm concentrating on it solely, and if
Yeah,
it's too intense, I'll turn it off
sure.
unless I can really like just focus on it. You know,
Hmm,
driving a lot of driving I do these days. I'm listening to language tapes. You know,
sure. Oh, cool. What language are you learning right now?
right now Japanese.
Wow. You got plans to travel there?
Um, yeah, I've been, but
Yeah.
it's another language. That I want to learn.
How many languages do you know or have you practiced or learned?
I can speak Spanish, German, Korean, Russian, English, and a smattering of some others.
Sure. Language has always been something I've been interested in. I'm just started playing with Duolingo. My wife does it for Italian. But I'm trying to learn Irish, Hawaiian, and Portuguese right now.
I think it's a great exercise for the brain,
Yeah,
especially when you're growing older like me. You want to keep your mind nimble, active, and strong. I think languages are a really good way to do it.
yeah. You have an incredible depth of life experience. Um, I'm curious what kind of not necessary. I'm not trying to put you in the position of being a guru or a sage, but what are some practical, straightforward things that insights that you've taken away from life, whether they be from positive experience or regrets or mistakes made and wisdom gained. What is something that you can impart that you would like to be, yeah, that you can impart from your experiences?
Close cover before striking. Oh goodness. That you will one of the things is never fear to do the difficult.
Okay.
Break it into small pieces and digest it a little bit at a time, but you got to go for the wall.
Sure.
You got to aim for the wall.
Yeah.
And you're gonna make mistakes, but just go for it. Go for it.
Yeah.
I see a lot. All the people that I've taught who have been the most successful have managed to work past the issue of insecurity and fear of them not doing well or
Hmm.
failing. They just blow past that and just
Right.
work. I think the most important thing is to have the discipline to spend time with it every day, you
Sure.
know, and just consistency.
Sure.
Consistency is what gets you results.
Sure.
You got to be just really consistent with your practice.
Yeah. Do you
Do it
feel like,
every day.
yeah, and like you said, mistakes happen, and I think for me especially, that's something that holds me back from time to time from moving forward on either a particular project or pulling the trigger on an experiment or something I'm trying to do. Do you have, is there a way that you kind of prepare yourself or give yourself kind of room to make those mistakes, or just keep it in your mind, I'm going to try this thing and I might just blow it all up and it might completely fail, or if something catches you off guard and there's a failure, how do you kind of give yourself kind of forgiveness for making a mistake in a way?
I just don't think about it. I
You
just,
don't,
okay,
you just,
what's the fix?
all right, you just move
What
forward.
is, yeah, just move forward.
Okay.
What's the fix? It's went wrong. Okay, it went
Yeah,
south. What's the fix?
I got you. Right, because dwelling doesn't honestly really do much benefit anybody much, right? And that's what's
Well,
happening.
not unless it's to figure out what happened, but
Sure.
once you figured out what happened, okay, you figured that out.
Okay.
Go.
Yeah.
Keep moving.
Cool. I like that.
Mm.
Um.
Just don't get snagged up on non-essentials.
Okay. Um. I've had this conversation several times with other makers, makers with bachelors or masters of fine arts, and makers who don't have masters of fine arts, and come from different various creative backgrounds. But what is your take on knife making as an art form? Are there certain times when it is and certain times when it's not? Um, what do you think?
This is a subject I've had to deal with many times, especially being part of an academic institution that
Right?
basically taught art.
Yeah.
And there was always the argument was like, well, if it has function, then it's not art. And I've always kind of bristled at that because sometimes I thought it was just an excuse to be able to put the label of art onto any piece of mess that you might, toss out in the world.
Sure.
And I think one of the things that made my courses so popular at the school was it was one of the few opportunities students would have to really push the limits of technique, to push the to combine the practical with the what's the word I'm looking for, with the aesthetics,
Hmm.
to make something functional that's also beautiful, to where technique actually mattered in the result, where focus upon the decorative arts, the aesthetics, the things that make some to understand about beauty. Why is it beautiful? What that I was never one who believed that beauty was entirely subjective. I think that there's a good deal of what is considered beautiful that's quite objective. Things are beautiful for a reason.
Sure.
Sure, there's a large subjective component to what is considered beautiful, but a lot of it is actually very objective. It's about proportions, ratios, colors,
Yeah.
textures, and the way they're put together in its endless number of permutations. But it's understanding how you work with these things, and that there are schema and actual ways of doing things that will produce certain results that you have to focus on, you have to study, you have to understand. And they're not an accident. There are ways to maximize the impact of certain things you might do or try, that will make something more beautiful, or if we miss the point, less beautiful. And I don't even know where I'm going with this line of reasoning here, but
You're doing great.
I feel like I'm rambling.
I know. I think it's it's good. I guess I often I go back and forth as to whether or not, excuse me, whether or not I am concerned about being considered an artist or not, or what I'm doing. I feel like what I create, some aspects for sure are very artful, or and there's a lot of creativity that goes into it. But I at the same time, I sometimes struggle when I see some of the, like the mess you said some people throw out there into the world being called art, and then comparing that to what I'm creating. I'm like, is that art, or do I, or not, or is my work art? Is that, do I want it to be considered art, or is it craft, or is it a weird mishmash of both? Do you know, it seems like there's some status that goes along with being considered an artist, um rather than a craftsperson, but maybe that's just an age old thing that I need to get over, where I think people don't hold craft and as high a revere as art. And so maybe that's where I'm coming from, where I want my work to be revered or cared for or cared about.
Yeah, you want to elevate it.
Yeah.
You know what? Okay, this is a subject I've actually thought about quite a bit,
Okay.
and I came up with something a number of years back, what I call the 4 principles of superior art.
Okay.
And that principle number one is that it's got to have a sense of life.
Hmm.
You have to, whatever it is you're creating, whether it be a birthday cake or a sword, or who cares what it is, but the person experiencing this creation must be able to get from it what it's like to be the creator in the world, some sense of what that person's life in this world is, how they feel about it, how they feel to exist in it, how, you know, how the world is affecting them.
Right.
It could, that experience can be negligible or profound, but it's got to be there.
Yeah.
It's got to be there. Then the next thing is, you know, it's got to have that sense of life. Then it has to have clarity. You've got to have a clarity that your intent has to appear in the work like crystal.
Sure.
It can't have inclusions and obscurity in it. It's got to be clear and focused. To get there, you've got to have technical control of whatever medium it is you're using.
Okay.
It has to appear facile. It has to appear like it was easy for you, no matter how difficult it is. So that requires headroom. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Technical control, like you may be able to express your ideas with that much technique and make them clear and understandable and effective. If you can, that's all the technique you need. But if you cannot make your ideas clear, effective, and broad reaching, well, then guess what? You need more technique. That's an open question. Only you can decide, you know, what is sufficient or what is lacking.
Right.
Only you get to decide that. But any issues around your work and its purpose and its message not being clear enough, to me, that's always going to be kind of a technical issue. Okay. How well you can manipulate your medium to get what it is you want to communicate across.
Sure.
Okay. So basically, it's a unique approach. a personal statement that communicates a sense of life, technical control, and then an endless flow of ideas. You have to be able to keep what you do fresh. You have to keep it flowing. You have to tap into something that's going to provide a wellspring of creativity and ideas. If that means getting away from immediately from this particular aspect of what you're doing and looking at maybe some other things that people are doing or that exist in the world, whether it be from nature, the efforts of others, et cetera, through history or whatever, you got to keep a fresh approach somehow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a personal approach, technical control, sense of life and meaning, and an endless flow of ideas. For it to, in my book, for it to be superior art, it's got to have all four of those things.
Sure.
And I think if you incorporate all of them and get them working together properly, it's going to be a superior result. But if you drop the ball on any one of them, well, not so much.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. I like that. I've never heard anything like that. Kind of not necessarily a definition of what is art, but a very strong foundation or guideline as to what can be considered art or is considered art.
Or
Or
what makes it a really standout
right.
artistic effort?
Yeah.
It's got to have those things.
Yeah.
You know, I've yet to see any kind of superior artistic effort that didn't contain all four of those.
Sure. I want to come back to, we talked about Joseph a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Where along your journey did you meet Joseph Schneider and start collaborating with him? I think what I've seen you collaborating with him. I've seen Don Fogg did collaborations with other makers as well. I feel like collaborations in that way don't happen as much as they used to. I feel like a lot of people think that they have to do everything, but I feel like there are again, by working with somebody who has a different set of skills than you do, you have an opportunity to create kind of like that elevated, crafted piece that one individual person might not
Well,
be able to do themselves.
yeah, this is a subject I've given a substantial amount of thought to. The whole sole authorship thing. This is a new concept.
Okay.
Art was never made this way in the
Sure.
past. Well, this is a I think it's a uniquely American idea.
Okay.
The sole pioneer who goes out and conquers everything on his own.
Right.
The rugged individualist. This is an American idea. You go back to Asia, to Europe. Art was never made that way. Art was always a studio effort.
Mm-hmm.
You had carvers, gem setters, the smiths, the this, the that, the other thing. You know, like a Japanese print wasn't produced by one guy. One guy did the image, you know, a line drawing. Then you had people who cut that drawing into onto wood. Then people who had the other registered plates for the colors, and you know, the person who actually mixed the pigments and the person who prepared the paper. It was a whole studio of people
Right.
who would produce this thing. The same. You look at the Russians today and the knives they're making. Man, they're the greatest art knife makers in the world today, is my opinion.
They're
They
astonishing.
do
Yeah.
complete presentations. And it took them 7 or 8 people to make each one. It's a studio effort
Yeah.
because you have a total amount of years of experience one person cannot attain.
Right.
One person cannot possibly have enough skills in their toolbox to do everything this piece represents.
Mm-hmm.
But 7 or 8 people can.
Right.
And if they're coordinated by a master designer, you know, boom. This is his vision. And in that vision, he's basically going, okay, for this vision to be realized, I will need this skill, this skill, this skill, this skill. Let me pick these people who possess these skills
Right.
and then coordinate them to realize this grand project. That's how art has always been made.
Right.
Right from the time, the Egyptians were decorating their, but it was all studios of people doing things.
I was honestly the first time, sorry, I'll interrupt you just for a second. The first time I ever learned that even like in ancient Rome, having a sword commissioned, you always see in movies or TV shows, somebody walks up to the blacksmith and says, I want this made. But the reality is they were talking to a designer of some sort who,
That's
like
right.
you're saying, were coordinating. The bladesmith forged the blade. Maybe somebody else ground the blade, another person polished the blade, another person did the castings for the hilt, another person assembled the hilt and set the stones or did the handle, the leather wrapping. So another
That's
person made the scabbard, all
that's
of
right.
that.
I mean that's how certainly how a katana is made
Right.
in this full. It's like the efforts of like 6 or 7 different artisans
Yeah.
to produce that thing. Again, this whole sole authorship, that's a new idea.
Do you think it stems from collectors? I had this idea just literally just now popped in my head. I could see a collector saying, I have this really incredible piece, and all of these skills that are represented in this piece came from one person, and attributing value to that rather than it coming from multiple people.
Again, I think it's partly collector driven, partly, but I
Sure.
think it's just the American ethos.
Sure.
The lone warrior, the lone pioneer who conquers nature and everything in his path on his own.
Yeah.
It's a uniquely American idea.
Hmm.
But anyway, getting back to Joseph and I,
Yeah.
our women basically put us together.
That's great.
Yeah. His wife and the woman I was dating at the time, both Russian, they were at some party. And the two of them were talking, and it went something. My boyfriend, he is bladesmith. Oh, my husband, he is jeweler. Two should meet.
I love it. That's great.
So it was them. They put us together,
Yeah.
and so we went and we meet. We got together. I brought blades and we're just like, huh.
Wow.
We have to make things.
Sure.
We just decided then and there that we had to work together.
Yeah.
And the Panther, that was our first project.
Oh, the Panther was your first project. Wow. Because the what's featured in the calendar for this year is the Eagle Sword, which
The
is
Eagles.
another, that thing is phenomenal and such a massive piece. I
It
can't
took a
even
year to make that.
I can't, I was just gonna say I can't even imagine how many man hours went into not alone just the blade, but just all of it. And yeah, it's an incredible piece.
Yeah, yeah. We're still making pieces.
I love it. And you guys call it Amarus, right?
Amarus, American Russian,
Yeah,
Amarus Blade Arts.
right. And you have a website.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you guys, how do you, when work comes available, or is it all commissioned? How do people learn about these things, these pieces that you guys collaborate on?
Yeah, with the website, the internet, they get photographed, they get seen,
Okay. I mean, do you have
here
like
and there.
an email list of collectors that you reach out to, or
Actually, no.
okay?
No.
And you said earlier you're not doing many shows anymore. Are some having a collaboration piece with Joseph, would that be a reason to go to a show?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got several new pieces that are almost completed,
Oh wow. Cool.
and they're our studio style, but they're going to be quite surprising.
I'm excited to see him.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, yeah, I guess part of the reason I ask you about the collaboration aspect is because I honestly, especially in the last couple of years, I've never really understood why it seems like people always want to do everything on their own, or that if somebody has had a hand in the finished product of a particular piece, um, why it seems like other folks feel like it doesn't have as much value, and I don't get that, because I guarantee if I tried to make a knife that had some sort of engraving on it, the engraving would look like dog shit, and it would actually bring the value of that knife down, or it would be so basic that it doesn't even really contribute much. And so I don't even know why I would do it in the first place. But to collaborate with somebody who has those skills, who could really embellish a piece and take it to another level that I could never get it to. I feel like that, and not only that, does that bring it more value, but that collaboration pieces I feel like are so unique these days that even brings it more value to work with another notable or talented maker to make this one of a kind piece.
There are guys who've always, like Joe Carls has always worked that way.
Yeah.
He would work with like Ron Skaggs and all the really great engravers and things like that, or Julie Warinsky, and
Sure.
he works with a lot of really great craftsmen to produce. I don't know if you ever seen these. Joe is one of these guys. He'll spend like 3 years making something fantastic and just give it away.
Whoa.
I've seen him do it.
What?
I've seen him make these incredible swords, and he'll just give it to the temple, to this, where he worships. He'll just give it to
Right.
them.
Wow.
Something that probably has, $200,000 worth of work in it, and
Right.
he'll just say, "Here, take this." And so he's never been afraid to really exploit the talents of great craftsmen in the production of something fantastic.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I've always looked to people like him who do that kind of outreach to other craftsmen and organization of their efforts to produce something really, really incredible.
Yeah.
So I like you say, why not? Why do it all by yourself? But there's another aspect to that question is, if a person can do it all by themselves and not have it look crappy, but have it look really good, you get the Delana Warrens and the Van Barnetts and the Julie Warenskys of the
Yeah.
world, you get, because they can do a lot of things and do it like really good.
Right.
So that's when I think, the collectors go crazy, and they who's this guy? He just won an award at the Texas show. He's French. He
Oh,
makes these
Jean-Louis Regal.
Regal. Man, what's with that guy?
It's pretty intense. He is a phenomenal talent.
What's that gal? She's also French. Laurent
Veronique.
Veronique.
Yeah. Laurent. Yeah.
Are you serious? I mean, yeah, you want to see her do it all.
Yeah.
Because she can do it all.
Right.
Because she can kick ass at all of it.
Yeah.
When you can do these like high level skills and kick ass at them, sure, a collector's going to want to see, how far you can stretch and what you can do.
Yeah.
Of course. Of course, that stuff is going to be more valuable, I think, than if like 5 people have done it, because this person is now emerging as like a triple threat.
Right. I got you.
He's like the dancer, the performer who can sing, who can dance, who can act.
Right.
Then you're Judy Garland.
Yeah.
You can do all these things.
Right.
You emerge as a triple threat, which is, I guess, by many metrics, something a little bit unusual, something a bit unique, something desirable.
Yeah.
because it's so unusual,
Sure.
because it's, yeah, I think that's where the appeal comes, for the sole authorship and collectors really going after it, because it's actually a very unique and unusual thing to find,
Sure. Um.
which makes it rare
Yes.
and collectible.
And collectible. I'm just trying to think. I don't know how much you were interested in going into this next question. We can just you can nix it if you like, but I would feel like I would be remiss to not ask you, because you are a maker of such high talent.
Oh,
Um,
goodness gracious.
and and um and you are in this industry that where there are not very many people of color, and so I'm curious how being a black man in this craft has presented challenges, or I think, or maybe challenges isn't the best word, or just like how, I don't know how to say it, or how to what I'm trying to say exactly, but what kind of challenges I guess you've come up against, or feeling as an outsider, if that's even been your feeling. What has it been like for you being a kind of definitely a minority in this craft, or possibly I don't even honestly know if there are other mastersmiths who are people of color. Um,
I was the only one for quite some time.
it's okay.
No, but
And
there's
you're the first.
now
I'm
there's a
guessing,
guy from China.
right? Yeah.
There's Andrew Mears,
Yes.
and maybe even one or two others that I don't know about.
Sure.
But one of the reasons I chose to do the ABS
Yeah.
advancement program to Mastersmith was that I wanted to serve as a model example to other young men of my persuasion, that you're not locked out of this. This is
Right.
something you can do. This is available to you. You know, be start. So no matter who and what you are,
Sure.
this is for you too. It's
Yeah.
not just for the guys from Texas with the cowboy hats. We
Sure.
can all do this.
Yeah.
And I've also got some other thoughts about that. I remember there was a point. There was I'm not going to mention any names, but I
Sure.
did have words with a couple of people around this issue.
Yeah.
And there was something like, one guy was the youngest ABS mastersmith, and he regularly mentioned that in his personal public relations.
Okay.
I'm the youngest, and there's also another one I'm the first woman who got a man, blah, 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 blah. And I remember taking each of them aside at some point and said, you know what? I understand your feelings about your uniqueness in these ways,
Hmm.
but you really shouldn't be talking about it. Because if this field is supposed to be blind to age, blind to color, blind to gender, it really shouldn't make any difference. You shouldn't be talking about it.
I got you.
And I said, like, sure, I'm the first black guy to have an MS, but I don't talk about it.
Sure.
And I said, how would it look like if I walked around going, I'm the first black man to have an, how would that read to people?
Yeah. I feel like most people in the organization would not appreciate that, even though
No.
it's it's completely understandable.
Yeah. How would that read if I just talked about that all the time, in
Sure.
my personal public relations? Like, it would be unseemly.
Sure.
And I feel it's just as unseemly to talk about your gender and your age in that way.
Right.
It should be completely neutral.
Yeah. I think it's awesome that you took that into account, because I think that is a hard thing. Excuse me. Um, in any discipline, for people to feel like it is a thing that they're capable of doing if they haven't seen somebody that looks like them doing it. And I don't know why I'm getting so emotional. I just think I think it's really powerful and and very important
It
that you've
is,
done
it
that.
is, it is, and it's an idea that I'm personally committed to. You know, I'm personally committed to that responsibility.
Sure. Well,
You
and
know?
you've taken it to such a high level too. And so it I think anybody young, especially, or new to the craft, who doesn't look like the majority of the fellowship of this craft, can see that basically the sky is the limit because
Yeah,
you've blown that ceiling up. I love it.
yeah, yeah.
And I got nothing but respect for you for it, for sure. Because I can't imagine it was always easy.
No, it wasn't. You know, and like I've had to wade through my share of like racial bullshit. You know,
Yeah.
and believe me, it exists. It
Yeah.
exists. I mean, I've had to hang around at the bar at the Blade show, and like when I'm around, having to hear a whole lot of N-word jokes and things like that.
Mm,
It was just it was definitely hazing. They wanted
okay.
to see, can he take it,
Hmm.
you know? And but you know, and I would let it go on to a point,
Yeah.
and I would eventually have to say, okay, fellas, you know, that's enough
Yeah.
of that. You know, but they did it again just to see, can he take it?
Right.
You know, how upset is it was hazing. It was hazing, straight up, straight up hazing.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot less of that going on now. You know,
Yeah.
who knows? But then again, you have people who find themselves. I remember Mears is like
Sure.
before he got into bladesmithing. You know, he's an adopted Korean kid who grew up, you know, in the burbs in a white family.
Yeah.
And he was not all that attached to his Asian heritage at all.
Sure.
Enter bladesmithing, he became like all about
Yeah. Sure.
he became all about an attachment to his Asian heritage. He started signing his name in kanji. He started exploring like Asian art motifs
Right.
and incorporating them with other traditions, and really doing the whole hybrid mix and match style thing, but with a strong Asian flavor.
Right.
He didn't discover that about himself until bladesmithing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I come from. I, it was a few years ago. I was having a conversation with my wife, or it actually didn't even start as a conversation. I have a tendency to just constantly be thinking and ruminating about things, or maybe ruminating is not the right word. But anyways, I approached my wife and I said, Am I'm Asian. Am I Asian? And she looked at me and she's like, "Are you fucking crazy?" Yes. I was like, I never even, because I grew up in a predominantly white community, going to school with predominantly white, white population. I'm very light skinned. I have some European descent, but mostly I'm actually Polynesian, some Chinese, and Native American as well. And it was only in the last few years that I realized my Asianness, I guess, in a way. And I think a lot of it had to do with my son being born, and thinking about, what is this heritage that makes me like some of my innate tendencies, but just even the way I look, or maybe some of my like ticks or anything like, and I just, it wasn't until really he was born that I started wondering more about my own personal heritage and how that influences who I've become as a person. because I've basically been completely disconnected from it as well, um, my whole life. Um, because it's a long story, but basically my father, who I get that Samoan heritage from, was an asshole. and so my mom had to kind of flee him to get away and to get to safe kind of refuge and get away. He was extremely violent, and so I grew up completely disconnected from that side of the family. um I don't know why I started going down that. I think as a response to what Andrew has
Mm.
experienced in learning about his Korean heritage, and so yeah, it's weird. Or for me, it's weird. I mean, I've gone most of my life just identifying as a white boy and realizing only a few years ago that that's not actually the case. Um, yeah, it's interesting. Interesting.
It certainly is.
Not the smoothest
Somehow
segue.
I can't imagine you identifying as a white boy. I don't.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just like I said, it's just the community and the people I grew up around, and just like I said, my own pale, light skin color. That's just I never even really thought about it. And my mom's white, and so um, always being around her, I was just, you know, I just I felt like I was an extension of her. But anyways, not the smoothest segue. But we have a few questions from the audience.
Yep. Shoot.
Okay. So these are folks over on my Patreon community. Um, they have submitted some questions for you, and I'm going to start just at the top from Mr. Kevin Rogers. He says, my question for JD: I'm setting up a dream shop as I transition to my third career. First, he was a winemaker, then a veterinarian, and now he's starting knife making.
Love
Is
it.
a is a TIG welder an essential tool for a serious pattern Damascus maker? I currently only have stick welding capability. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. So his questions around TIG welding or welding equipment.
TIG maybe to set up certain things, but MIG definitely.
Yeah, I would agree.
You're definitely gonna need a MIG welder.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Metal
he's
hot glue gun.
yeah, metal hot glue gun. That's what I always call it too. I mean, you make so many great patterns, from twists, and W's, crushed W's patterns, and alternating kind of like straight layer and vertical layer kind of patterns and stuff.
Mm.
Um, at what point do you think TIG welding? Have you seen TIG welding be a benefit to the pattern developing process?
That's a question I'm not qualified to answer because I've never done it.
Okay. I will jump in then real quick, just to answer a little bit from my perspective. I think that a TIG welder is not 100% necessary, even for some mosaic patterns, honestly. I've done mosaics with just using a MIG welder, which I imagine you can also just use a stick welder to weld pieces together. They're a little bit more involved, and it has some to do with like canning up the pattern material to kind of keep oxygen out, especially when doing tiled billets. But it's TIG is not an essential tool. I think, like JD was saying, a MIG really helps things. Like it's makes welding dummy proof. Like you said, it's a metal glue gun, um, and you can achieve and accomplish a lot of really great patterns without a TIG and only with a MIG. But there are some welding techniques that you kind of are limited or are outside one's capabilities until they have kind of access um, to a TIG welder, especially around mosaic Damascus and mosaic tiles, um, and a kind of irregular billet constructions as well, I guess. Would that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot you can do with just a MIG welder and a forge. a lot, like almost all of it,
Like
honestly.
just the most things,
Yeah, almost all of it. So I don't think it's essential, but a MIG welder is super handy and they're
Unless
super
unless
accessible.
unless he can find or develops a technique or stumbles upon a technique where it's an essential tool. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
that can happen.
Yeah.
Then you just
Absolutely.
need what you need.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen MIG welders for as cheap as like 150, $160, but I've also seen TIG welders that are like 200, $250. They're not the best in the world, but for tiled mosaics and some of the special constructions where it comes in very handy for fusion welding, um, it works great. All right, the next one is um oh boy. I even had a lesson from this gentleman is Dutch, and I'm sorry, I'm probably gonna butcher it again. All right, so Jeroen Nippenberg. He says, or he asks, what things are important to get clean forge welds in elaborate Damascus patterns? How do you get welds in the end stage, tile welds, multi-bar welds, invisible? How important is fluxless welding for this? And thank you for your wisdom inspiration.
Good questions. Let's take them one by one. What's the first one again?
Okay, so the first one is what things are important to get clean forge welds in elaborate Damascus patterns? So probably like
Okay.
the weld boundaries. Yeah.
Clean is for me, if you want it as clean as possible, you should be working with very flat surfaces, meeting surfaces. You want those clean, devoid of all pock marks and irregularities. Get them clean. No scale in there, nothing to form a fissure or a pocket. Get them clean. You're going to need to do the curing that we talked about, so that that your weld boundaries tend to be iron. They tend to be decarburized, and they will show up as lighter areas.
Sure.
And so, if you want consistency with appearance and color and texture and things like that, you're going to want to make sure that all your welds have had a proper soak time, and that they're properly cured, so that the carbon has migrated and averaged out nicely,
Mm-hmm.
so that you don't have those really white iron borders. Next question.
Okay. And then he says, how do you get welds in the end stage, whether it's tiling or multi bars? How do you make them invisible? I think you kind of started to answer
Yeah,
that
well,
or
yeah,
did answer that
we
just
talked
now.
about that.
Um, and it's about giving it time for that carbon to
Yeah.
migrate. Do you happen to know off the top of your head um, how much time you would try to account for to allow that carbon to, or how much time at high temperature to allow that carbon to migrate and move to even out through those weld boundaries?
Well, first of all, let's talk about what do you consider high temperature. I think
Sure.
just over welding temperature is enough.
Okay.
You know, just around that temperature, which is what, it's about 17, 1800.
Right.
You know, just over there.
Yeah. That's when, so basically, yeah. So above critical for sure in the austenitic range. And, but that's when the carbon is really kind of jumping and jiving, moving around and
Jumping
gets,
and jiving,
yeah.
jiggling around,
Yeah.
getting jiggy. Yeah.
Getting
Mm-hmm.
jiggy with it. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
More questions.
Okay. Next one of that is how important is fluxless welding for those various processes that we just discussed?
I'm a big proponent of it personally, because it's going to have fewer inclusions. The welds are going to be cleaner. They're going to be stronger. I say do it whenever possible. Do it whenever feasible.
Sure.
There's certain operations you might need some flux for. Like I found that the bird's mouth, I will flux that weld.
Sure.
Okay. There are other things you may need. You may have a delamination in a piece. I will flux that. Okay, that's
Okay.
going to be hard to repair without fluxing it.
Yeah.
Because it might have non-combustible material in it that the flux will actually dissolve and put in solution, so that when it's struck, all that unnecessary material can be ejected from the space
Sure.
that you're trying to close.
Right.
Because if you don't eject it all from the space you're kind of trying to close, you will form a flaw.
Right.
So there are times where you still must use flux to do certain things. But at this point in time, I have attempted to minimize its use as much as I possibly can, and only use it when no other technique or way of doing it will actually work.
Yeah, I'm 100% on board. I'm on the same page with you. Is there a particular type of flux that people will want to use? I've seen
Anhydrous borax is the one I use.
Okay. Because I've seen traditional blacksmiths use flux with some sort of like carbon in it or other things mixed in. I don't know if those actually help or not,
Don't mix
or iron.
anything in with it, because it's all contaminant.
Okay.
A lot of that stuff doesn't actually liquefy or dissolve too. I
Okay.
mean, don't know, just anhydrous borax.
Okay.
I mean, anhydrous borax works by when it melts, it dissolves things like flux and puts it in solution.
Right.
So
Sorry.
that
It
so
dissolves
that
the flux or the forge scale?
the Ford scale,
Yeah. Okay.
it dissolves non combustible junk,
Yeah.
and it puts it in solution, so that when it's pressed or struck, it just expels the molten flux with its dissolved impurities.
Yeah. I like that term you're using, eject. Because that makes sense, because especially when it's a potential delamination, especially on the outside, it's so exposed to the rest of the forge atmosphere. It doesn't have an opportunity for the oxygen in whatever forge scale has developed, even just in an instant, to be consumed and go away. And that's
It's
why
dirty.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
dirty. Yeah, that flux
It's
is good.
dirty.
So that flux is beneficial and useful at those points when you have something like that that needs to go away, basically. Um, and you can't rely just on the atmosphere for it to kind of clean itself.
Mm.
Mhm.
There's junk in there.
It's junk. All right, we got another one from a former student of yours, Mr. David Singer. He says, "What has your biggest inspiration for designing a new Damascus pattern been? Can you break down the process you use to make the inspiration a reality?"
I think we should double team this one, Mariko.
Okay.
Because you dwell in that world a lot more than I do.
Okay.
And my ideas from patterns come from, they're not we approach it slightly differently.
Yeah.
I'm a lot simpler in my thought process than you are. And I feel like I work with simpler elements. But it's basically architectonic. What I mean by that, I'm a person who will take simple modules and start compounding them into more complex structures.
Okay.
But you can still see the elements and the components that went in to make this larger picture.
Right.
Okay. You, I believe, to my eye, you work with a slightly different way. It's still architectonic in its approach, but
Sure.
what your results basically, what's the word I'm looking for? They have morphed and evolved from their basic state, from their basic positions and their basic kinds of configurations, until they're changed to a point that they're difficult. Mine are not difficult to reverse engineer at all.
Okay.
You and many others like you develop techniques that can be very difficult to reverse engineer, because you've taken them through a lot of different steps. You've taken them through a lot of different permutations, as far as like cutting, restacking, repositioning.
Sure.
That makes it a bit more difficult to reverse engineer and really figure out. Okay.
Yeah.
My system is based on some very simple concepts. I call them levels. Okay. I consider anything level 1, level 2, level 3. Okay, let me explain. I'll explain the way I think about it. Then you can chime in with, maybe how maybe a little bit something more about your personal approach, Mariko.
Okay.
My personal approach is, I feel like a straight layered billet. There's just straight layers.
Sure.
Right? I call that first level.
Okay.
Also, maybe a bias forge billet. That's first level. Okay. Now, when you think of first level, where can you go from there? Okay, you can do one of several things. You can cut a groove in it, flatten it, bring up layers and distort them.
Yeah.
Anything you do to distort your layers from their original straight flat position, I call second level.
Okay.
You can forge it on the bias. So you're distorting your layers. You can cut a groove, forge it flat. You've distorted your layers. You can impact that billet and thereby distort the layers by pressure or deformation.
Sure.
And then grind it flat.
Texturing.
Texturing.
Yeah.
You can grind it flat after you've distorted it. You can twist it. You can upset it. You can forge it 90 degrees and create W's, okay?
Yeah.
This puts everything in the second position. You're taking your first level technique, which is just making straight layers.
Yeah.
Then you begin to distort your layers, okay? Now, and that puts it in the second position, or I call it second level. So from your second level, like let's say you've made W's and you twist those W's, you're putting it into a third. You're taking layers that have already been distorted, then you're throwing a first level technique on top of that.
Yeah.
Your first level, cutting, punching, twisting, redirecting your forging direction. That's all first level techniques. Those are the basic things that you can do to a straight layer.
Yeah.
Now, if you take the results of any of that, now you're going to second level distortion, where you're cutting, shark's tooth is cutting into W's the same way you would do a ladder.
Right.
So that's it. So that's your ladder in a second position. Twisting your W's will get you firestorm. That's taking your basic W's, then putting them in the second position by taking a first level technique, superimposing it on top of a second, superimposing it on top of the first level technique. Mm-hmm. Now, you can also cut and reposition, where you get your explosion pattern. You basically cut a twisted W's pattern, a firestorm, down the center. Then you take the center line and move the insides to the outsides. The outside seams now become your inner seams, okay? So when you reposition something from the second position, you get third level distortion, right? So
Right.
I basically divide first level, second level, third level. Now, if you take that and you restack and cut it in any way, you've moved it to the fourth level. So you are in the process of constantly adding levels of distortion to your original material.
Right.
I tend to stop at level 3, which is cutting and restacking things from level 2.
Right.
I create my universe from a very defined and limited number of techniques. You take it much farther. You take the whole repositioning, you take the whole creating permutations of simple things. You take it much farther than I do. So it can be approached either way.
Sure.
From the simple permutations that I use basically to create what I do, to the very much more involved numbers of permutations that you employ to create what you do.
Right. A lot of the patterns that I've either innovated or played with and developed are actually born from mistakes. What they are is, and I think I remember here Don Fogg saying that W's started as a mistake. I think he had forged a billet down to square stock and he lost track of orientation. And then instead of continuing to forge down flat, he actually forged on edge and continued to draw the bar out. And that's how he developed the C bars that then when you stack them up again become W's. And so and that was only, I think in the last year I heard a conversation he had with another knife maker. That was a good interview. But a lot of the patterns I make are start, like I said, start as mistakes. And it's when I'm forging on the bias and maybe I don't do it perfectly right. And I'm actually off bias just by the slightest little bit, but it does create some interesting movement that I didn't anticipate. And so I set that bar down and and I come back to it later trying to figure out how I can reassemble um, the material to create something useful from what essentially is potentially a failure. Um, and that has led to a lot of the funky patterns that I've created. And I'm also actually trying to um, a lot of it is just trying to reorganize the material, a very traditional way of forging, like you're saying, the first or second level processes, but then reorganizing them in a way that hasn't been seen. And because it hasn't been seen, it is confusing. And also for them to come together in a really, really tight and clean way makes them look like they're actually a lot more complicated than they really are. Most of the patterns I do now are only 2 or 3 welding processes to get to what would become either my tile bar or a mother bar that I would then cut tiles from, or a bar that could be twisted or laddered or accordion to open up and reveal the core pattern, or the pattern running through the core of that material. And some of the inspiration comes from my inspiration comes from trying to turn mistakes into gold, basically taking lemons and turn them into limoncello. um but then also I do see things out there in the world, and I think, I think I can make a Damascus pattern out of that. And then I start drawing and trying to identify different elements within that thing and figuring out what forging processes could create that activity and movement. Oh, did you spill a bunch of water?
Yeah.
um do you need a second to grab a towel or something?
No, we're good.
Okay, cool. But other than that, I'm just trying to think. Yeah, I'm just trying to confuse people more than anything. I think a lot of, honestly, my
Confuse the
patterns
hell out of me.
lot of my patterns,
I look at what he's doing, and I'm like, man, how the fuck did he do that?
a lot of my patterns are deceptively straightforward. It's just, again, it's stuff that people haven't seen before. And so that's why it's confusing for a lot of folks. But if I were to break it down and show you how I made some of my patterns, it would just be like, oh, of course. But it's just, it's what a lot of people are seeing are the finished assemblage of the work. And so, and the way a lot of the lines, and it's very intentional, it's that control and having mastery of, like you were saying before, of an intention around your technique to control how those lines come back together so that they look like they're actually all one process when they're actually several processes. And that's what confuses, I think, a lot of folks.
Yeah, I look at stuff like I see Salem Straub and
Yeah,
you and a whole bunch of other people doing it. I'm like, you guys are just taking it way beyond what I would ever think of taking it. I just don't think that way.
sure.
Ultimately, like that's just my thought process is as it's not as involved as that. I like to work with simple elements,
Right.
and I think you can build your universal, off of pretty much anything. I think for myself, I've kind of discovered that any artist, um, when he's at the beginning of his exploration process, he's trying a lot of things. He's
Sure.
trying to, what if I do this? What if I do that? But eventually, as time goes on, he's going to settle on 3 or 4 things that he can pull off with
Mhm.
perfection and ease. And from those 3 or 4 things, he'll build his universe from that.
Right.
He'll simplify,
Yeah.
he'll pull in.
Yeah, I feel like I've started getting to that point. When I first started, I thought the best way to make complicated and interesting and challenging patterns was to weld steel, put it through a process, cut it up, reassemble it, whether it's a vertical stack or a four-way or a 3x3 or whatever, and then weld it, cut it, stack it again, and keep just welding and stacking, welding and cutting, stacking, welding, cutting, stacking, like 4 or 5 iterations, 5 or 6 iterations of welding to then come to a parent bar that then I would tile from or ladder or whatever. And like I said, in the last few years, I've been working to simplify that for myself, just energy wise, realizing that I can achieve similarly confusing and complicated patterns within only 2 or 3 welding rounds.
Uh,
And 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 that has actually been what I've been trying. I was talking to Salem Straub actually about this the other day, that has been my goal now, has been to try to figure out how complex of a pattern can I create in as few welding rounds as possible. Now, there's definitely a lot
yeah.
more prep work that goes into some of the pattern assemblies. But there's still only 2 or 3 welding rounds. And then I have my parent bar that then, like I said, I tile or I twist or I ladder or whatever to reveal the pattern. Um, no, I don't know. I remember when I first started making knives, or not first starting, I'd worked with Bob Kramer for 3 years, and then when I struck out on my own finally, um i I had a book with all kinds of drawings in it, and a maker who I had been working close to um was laughing at me saying that every pattern's already been made, there's nothing you can do that's new. And I was like, that can't
Uh-uh.
that can't be
Uh-uh.
real, there's no way. And the first time, that briar patch that I showed you at the Dragon's Breath Forge shop, that was one of my first, I feel like my first really big kind of innovations in pattern development, where it was weaving over itself and looked like basically a twisting briars. you know, flowing over each other. And that was and having the kind words that you shared with me about that pattern helped me reaffirm to me that I was not only on a good path or the right path, but that there's definitely a lot more to be discovered and created, um, than some people think there are.
No doubt.
Yeah.
I mean, I've taken the simple concept of W's and done some pretty interesting things with them
Yeah.
simply by, I mean, there's one blade I recently did where I just changed I set up some W's, then just every weld change the I would cut it in half and change the orientation
Okay.
of it 90 degrees.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And once I had developed it to a certain point, then ladder it.
Right.
I got some like incredibly interesting things just from changing the direction of the forging 90 degrees every fold.
I believe it. Yeah,
You
I
know,
believe it.
simple W's.
W's is a great foundational pattern that creates a lot of very interesting things.
Yeah,
That is a pretty cool breakthrough. Okay.
twisting in W's.
Twisting. Yeah.
If I had to say, most of my patterns are twisting in W's,
Yeah.
twisting in W's, different densities of twists,
Sure.
different numbers of layers of twists, different tightness of, loose,
Right.
tight, and everything in between, and just building modules out of those kinds of things and putting them together.
Right. Yeah. We do have a couple more questions. Are
You
you
bet.
still up for them? Okay.
You go.
All right. This one is from Mr. Josh A. Weston. He says, how do you handle the mental roadblocks that hinder forward progress and trying new things? You've clearly jumped many hurdles in your craft, and that many others just stare at in bewilderment. So we kind of touched on this earlier, but what are some of the techniques or things you do for yourself when you feel like you've hit a roadblock, or a wall or a challenge that you are struggling to puzzle your way through or figure out what the next step is?
Get away from the wall, look over the wall, look around the wall.
Okay.
But you may just have to shift your focus until something comes to you. And you know, I a lot of times if it happens to me, I just again, getting away from the wall is probably my go-to
Yeah.
way I handle those things. Just sit back a minute. Don't focus on it so much. Just get away from it.
Yeah.
Come back in a day. Look at some other things. I mean, that are really different.
Yeah.
Maybe listen to some Hindemith or something instead of looking at knives, or go to the museum or just sometimes I would just walk around the neighborhood and
Sure.
look at architectural details on buildings. Or nice place to walk through is the cemetery, because they have a lot of sculpture in there
Yeah.
with a lot of different kinds of decorative borders and decorative carving and things. You get a lot of ideas from that. And
That's interesting.
natural formations of
Sure.
stone. Just get out in nature and look, see what you see.
Sure. I've never heard.
Animals,
Yeah. I've never heard.
animal skins and
Oh, right. And patterns.
lizards and textures. It's all out there.
Yeah.
But you get away from what it is you're doing for a minute and just shift your focus.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. I have a tendency to be stubborn and keep trying to push forward and try to figure out the problem, but it only makes things actually worse and more frustrating for myself. And I have to set it down and go away. And whether that's even just working on something else in the shop, that or cleaning the shop, you know. But yeah, I have to take a step away from the work, and sometimes I've even set stuff down for like months at a time before being able
Oh
to
yeah.
come back with And basically almost completely forgetting about it and coming back and seeing it again kind of with fresh eyes. And of course, still doing other work in between, um but with those fresh eyes, it helps me to see the work kind of in a different way, or from a different perspective. And I guess, like you're saying, backing away from that wall, if you're right up against a wall, that's all you see. But until you start backing away and gaining greater perspective, and you're not the only solutions you're going to see are right here, and those ones already don't work until you start backing away, and then all of a sudden you see all this other stuff. So yeah, creating space for yourself to get out of that block, because I think that's it. Yeah, just get away from that block, go do something else. Yeah, it's interesting. I've never heard anybody else say that they enjoy going for a walk through the cemetery. I love going for walks through cemeteries. I think they're really interesting places. I've never been creeped out by them, and I think that there's a lot of interesting and sweet words that people say to their loved ones, or that people have said for themselves on their headstones and stuff. But there are also a lot of very interesting uh, sculpture and artwork on some of this on some stone headstones.
Yeah, a lot of these monuments are really beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, the last one we got in here says, this is from Kevin Cunningham Knives. He says, what geometry and heat treat do you like for ABS test knives? A softback seems easy, but your students' knives seem to mostly spring back almost true. So it
Yep,
sounds like he's curious about what
yep.
you teach your students.
What I teach them is the following: that tempered martensite is demonstrably stronger than pearlite.
Mhm.
And a blade that takes a permanent 90 set or more, to me, is a defective blade.
Mm,
Doesn't have any strength.
sure.
So I don't go for the standard of it bending and staying bent.
Sure.
To me, in my book, it's a defective blade.
Right.
I would rather have a blade that, when bent, actually did break under extreme extreme deformation and extreme, if you have to use all your power and a 6-foot cheat bar to break it, that
Yeah.
thing is, for all intents and purposes, in normal use, indestructible. Okay,
Right.
that's, if you had to do all of that to break it, it's not going to break in ordinary use. And guess what? If it does, it's still usable.
Right.
You still have a piece.
Right. You
You
still
still
have
have something.
you still have like
But
8 inches of a
if it
blade.
bends, but if it bends into a U shape, well, what is that? What have you got?
I got you. What
So the
what
whole standard of it, you know, I just, again, okay, I've already said what I had to say about it. So that's my thing. And the configuration of the blade thickness, I go with anywhere from 3/16 to 1/4 inch.
Okay. And then geometry wise, to withstand the chopping but still be sharp enough to cut a rope or shave.
I'm gonna say 18 degrees at the edge or better.
Okay.
Okay, it's anything.
Overall or each side?
I mean, the angle itself shouldn't be any more than 18 degrees.
Okay.
Around there. Me, I work with 12 sometimes.
Sure.
But it should be a very acute angle.
Right.
When the steel has been properly tempered and hardened, instead of heat treated, that's not going to prove to be a problem with chipping or curling.
Right. Yeah. Do you do a gentle convex of some sort, a convex, or
Yes,
do you do?
yes,
Okay.
gentle convex.
And then just trying to think what else. I can't think what else. So I think that brings us basically to the end of our conversation. I really appreciate your time. I'm just double checking in here to see if there have been any other new. Oh, there actually are. Let's see. No, there aren't any new questions. So this has been a marathon and a great conversation, and I really appreciate the depth of insight you brought to it, and the thoughtfulness you brought to your answers.
Well,
Um,
thank you so much.
yeah, it was very. I very much appreciate you sharing this time and conversation with me and this community. This will be out for the public. I think next month or the following month. Um, and I'll make sure to get you tagged up and everything and make
Mm.
sure it's easy to save and get around. Um, Steve Lehman's in here in the chat. He says, thank you for all your wisdom. Cheers. And yeah, and I just again, Dave Singer's in here too. I'm sure he says thanks as well. Yeah, I really appreciate everything. And thank you everybody for joining. I know this is a different format, but this is something we might do actually in the future because the other platform that I'm using it has been proving to be a little bit tricky, not just for this but previous conversations. And so I appreciate everybody's patience and hanging out and being here for this conversation, and I look forward to this living on for quite a long time.
Yeah, thanks, Mariko. Thanks for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, like I said at the beginning, I to me, you are a living legend. The standard that you set with your work is extremely high, and the example you set is extremely high, and it's something worth people looking at and seeing as something to shoot for. Absolutely. um and I don't know what else to say about it.
Well,
I
that's a
respect the
pretty
hell out
high
of you.
compliment. That's a pretty high compliment coming from you, but I'll take it.
Yeah, I just
I'm
respect the
not
hell
going
out
to
of you.
turn it down.
I appreciate it. All right. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, everybody. And
Thanks, everybody.
we'll
Thanks for
catch you.
watching.
Yeah. Catch you next time.